Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jayne Backett. Jayne is a banking and asset finance partner at the leading UK law firm, Field Fisher, where her practice specialises in real estate finance transactions. Jayne has a deep experience of mentoring and training junior lawyers and is passionate about diversity. Jayne previously contributed as a columnist to the Above the Law, where she wrote about a number of topics, including her perspective as a female partner and working mother at a large firm. So a very, very big welcome, Jayne.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for that. Yep, great to be here.
Pleasure to have you on the show. And before we go through all the amazing work and everything you've achieved to date, we must start with our customary icebreaker question on the show, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real would you rate the hit series Suits in terms of its reality?
Oh, it's really high. I love Suits. A good 9.5, I think. It's definitely one of my favourite shows.
There we go. It's nice for a partner to give it a high score for once. I guess is that more because you're just a fan of the show versus the actual reality, or are you one of these people who's going to say, do you know what, it gets knocked a lot, but there is some truth to it?
They did a really good character study. I mean, a character like Lewis Litt, for example, there's definitely one of those at every law firm, if you ask me.
Good stuff. So before we go through your legal journey, we like to start at the beginning with all of our guests. So tell us a bit about your family background and upbringing.
Thanks. I come from a very much working class family background. My dad was a builder, sadly, who's died now. But yeah, he was a builder and a roofer, so he used to go out all hours and Christmas Day. I remember him working a lot. But he was also, a bit of an entrepreneur. He'd always worked for himself. He knew how to build businesses, and he knew how to turn properties around from sort of, rundown places into something much more amazing, which is such a big thing these days. You look at, the renovation cult that there is out there, and he was doing that, back in the 70s when it wasn't such a big thing to do, I don't think. So, yeah, I mean, that's where I probably got my interest in the property side of what I do. But yeah, I grew up, I went to, state schools. I went to a state comp I lived down on the coast in a place called Deal in Kent, my secondary school. And yeah, I mean, I had a good time down there. It was a nice upbringing, but, very simple. We lived a very sort of simple life. So yeah. Me.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that totally makes sense in terms of your practice from a sort of property real estate perspective. So where did the legal ambition come from then? Did you always want to be a lawyer, or where did that interest spark from?
I think I always really liked English. So I was much more a words person than a mathematician, which is probably typical of a lot of lawyers as well. We're always saying things like, well, don't show me the spreadsheet. So I think from that side, the words and the English side of it, the law was appealing. Really sort of probably took a lot of it again from my dad. I remember him suggesting that it would be a great career, and also telling me that just because I was from a background where no one else in the family went to university, there was no reason that I should think that I couldn't go to university. He was always very ambitious. Again, back to him, but he'd sort of dragged himself out of a lifestyle of family which were living in council houses and had been in the Margaret Thatcher generation of buying privately, and that sense of ownership and that sense of working for yourself and having something to be really proud of. So he was very much of the view that I should not think that there were any boundaries of what I could do. So him suggesting that I might become a lawyer was to him, perfectly normal and, thing that I should be capable of doing.
Brilliant. It sounds like a real role model for you, as well as a father and someone who's always pushed you. So that's a really nice story. And thanks for sharing that. So to the more of the present, as you may know, banking law is typically a male-centric practice area. What made you choose to qualify into sort of banking and sort of asset finance?
It's funny you say that. I started, was at Mayor Brown for 11 years and I trained there, and I started my first seat in the property department. And I thought, given my background and my dad's sort of career, I thought that property would be exactly the thing I wanted to do. And I just found that actually I wasn't quite as into that side of it as the bit where I next went, which was into the banking team at Mayor Brown, where they were doing lots of international transactions, big deals, high profile stuff, making the paper, working culturally slightly differently to the property team, banking teams. It's sort of slightly glitzier, I think, sometimes. So I was lured by lots of that, I think, and I just really enjoyed my time in that team. And it was, again, it was a very entrepreneurial team. It was taken over by guys called Bruce and Dominic, and they transformed it to some extent into, I think, what it probably is now. And it was very dynamic. So I just really enjoyed my time there.
Brilliant. Okay. And sticking with that sort of theme, why do you think that areas such as banking have so few female partners?
I think it's a very tough culture. And it's, when you look at the banking industry, again, that's always been very male dominated. So you're a service provider to that industry, and therefore the expectations put upon you come from probably quite a patriarchal place. The working hours of bankers. I don't know if you've seen the show Industry
Yes, I have.
yet, but it's not much. That was set in the Mayor Brown offices, actually. Some of it. It's not that much different. So you are beholden to people who work all hours, who expect their lawyers and their other service providers to be out, in the drinking culture on the scene. And I wouldn't say that it was in any way not open to women to join into that culture, but it's difficult if you're not used to some of that to actually break in or to know how to operate in those parameters. And it's difficult to know, to not be intimidated by it, I would say.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and thanks for sharing that. And in terms of one of your notable achievements is you also made equity at Field Fisher, I believe, last May, which is very, very exciting. And you're now part of a small group of women under 40 that have made equity, which is fantastic achievement. Tell us about how you achieved that, and as a secondary point, why do you think so few women have made equity as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you. It is, I think, back to the same points. There are a theme here, which is that you have to be prepared to be networking early on in your career. I think people sometimes, when they're junior, underestimate the value of long-term networking. A lot of the people that I know or that became clients were people that I'd met, or they were in the same network as people I've met 10 or 12 years before. So it's a long game. And unless you place that value early on networking and people, and I've always been very much about it being a people business and a client service business and very client service orientated. Unless you have that attitude, I think it's difficult to then one day turn around and say, right, I want to be a partner and I want to be really successful, because you've got such a lead in time to doing all of that. So definitely about networks. I've learned so much in my, let's say, 15 years from being a trainee to now. And my temperament's different, my ability to navigate politics is different, my attitude to how to handle crises or how to handle difficult situations is so different, and even different to the day I stepped into Phil Fisher 4 years ago, really 4 and a bit years ago. Just, it's such a huge learning curve, the job. You learn something every day and every week that you practice. So you have to be prepared to be open-minded and resilient and constantly able to adapt and learn, I think, Rob.
Yeah, no, some really good nuggets of wisdom shared there. So thanks for that. And I love that sort of networking, because that's a key theme that we talk about throughout the show, and the importance of it. So it's great that someone who's been so successful that's talking about that from early on, the value of doing that. So thanks so much for sharing that. And then I guess if you were to highlight one piece of advice from your own experiences you would give to women who have aspirations of making equity partnership at a major firm, or even a high street firm, what piece of advice would you give to them?
I would say go out and read some sales books. That's exactly, sounds really corny, I'm sure, but like that's exactly what I did when I decided I was going to take the partnership at Phil Fisher. I thought you can never be a good enough salesperson. This is a sales job. People don't like to, it's a profession, so people can be a little bit snobby about it. But I went out and I read a few different sales books and a few different kind of management or people management type books. And I think the sales aspects really held firm for me. I followed some of the principles of what I read, and those things definitely worked as a formula. There's part art and part science involved in sales, and the science bit and the formula bit of how much you have to repeat your message, how often you need to get your name out there, how you need to use different platforms to do that, how important face-to-face meetings are and follow-ups and all of that stuff. If you just take some percentage of nuggets of those things that you read, then you're going to hopefully be more successful than the next person that's not following any of that.
And I'm just loving that you've said that, because that's talking my language. Obviously, as a salesperson, I've been involved in recruitment, lots of businesses, and ultimately, business development is a key core skill set as any sort of partner as you grow through your career. And ultimately, you need to have that fundamental understanding of how commercial sales work. So it's really good that you kind of highlighted that, on top of obviously being technically very good at the law and what you do, because it's great at being very book smart, but you've also got to be commercial smart and turn that into conversions and winning clients, fostering relationships, and all of that great stuff. So yeah, love that. So you've achieved a lot. Alongside being a partner, you're also a proud mother. Tell us about navigating your journey into motherhood.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I say this to a lot of team members that I work with and colleagues. There's never a right time in your career, in this career in particular, to decide to have children. Although I must say that lockdown seems to have sparked a few pregnancies. Yeah, there's never a perfect time, because you're always going to worry, am I going to miss out on, this opportunity or that opportunity, or clients and contacts going to forget about me? I think I decided that I wanted that to be part of my life relatively early on. So I tried to think of the career as a marathon and not to let that get in the way. And I knew that I wanted more than one child as well, because I have siblings, but they're 20 odd years older than me. So I was almost raised as an only child, and I missed that, having a sibling relationship. So I wanted that for my children. So I had two. I've got a daughter, Grace, who's 10, and a son who was 8 just this week, called Zach.
Ah.
So yeah, it's been a happy time. And I always think, I've seen so many successful women who've got big families, 3 or 4 children, and they've still made a massive success of their career, because you can step in and step out and then back in again if you have the right support networks around you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's almost, you talked about networking earlier, but also as you advance through your career, having the right support in all aspects of your life is so important. It's all sounded plain sailing thus far, but business, in the business world, it's not, and there are lots of knockbacks and there are lots of challenges. So what have been the biggest challenges you've faced when balancing your busy banking and finance practice and being a working mother?
There's lots of challenges. I think when I started at Phil Fisher, one of the challenges is that I'd come into a new firm as a lateral hire. Nobody knew who I was, or whether I didn't even know whether I would, make a go of it. It was throwing balls in the air. And so I didn't have a team structure around me. I didn't have the loyalty of people who I'd worked alongside for a long time. And I had to build and earn that trust of the team, as well as trying to bring in clients and service them. And I think I have to say that it's very stressful, because once I did start to bring in work, and it did take a little while to get going, but once I did start to bring in work, I then found that it quickly accelerated beyond the boundaries of the team that I had around me, and working out, not having previously been a partner, and working out alongside my other partners at Phil Fisher how to resource these new deals, and put a finger in the wind and say what the pipeline would look like and how long it would sustain itself, and all of those things. You're making guesstimates all of the time as to how to run the business. And I'm sure anyone in a similar business will understand those challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks so much once again for sharing that. And then for, mothers returning to work in the law, what one piece of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I would say, come back. The thing I've said, and I've shouted it shouted it. I don't shout much anymore, but, I've shouted it loudly in partner meetings is, just get people back. I remember back to Dominic Griffiths at Mayor Brown. The one thing that, I'm really so grateful to him for is that when I'd had my first child, he said, just come back. Doesn't matter how many days, how many days you want to work at home. Doesn't matter. If you want to do 1 day a week, 5 days a week, whatever you want. And I thought that there were probably hardly anybody in the city around that time in 2010 or 11 that were saying those things to their employees. And, what an inspiration to be able to think that I had the flexibility to just come back. And I think he was absolutely right. And he did that for many of the women in that team at the time, or through those years, where he just encouraged them to step back on in whatever form that looked like. And yeah, it's an absolute inspiration. And I try and carry that through, and just say to the women or the men now going out, just come back. It doesn't matter. We'll make it work. But not everybody has that, that much of an open mind about it, or that longer term view of, if you get people to step back on, they'll probably want to do a bit more and, feed back in as they can.
No, that's a really good point. And it kind of mirrors what you're saying earlier around support. I think, support comes under also, supportive leadership. And that is just a great example of really genuine supportive leadership. And, that's done wonders, and testament to what you've gone on to achieve as well. So yeah, that's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that. We are living in a pandemic. How has the pandemic affected that sort of balance, and how has it made it more challenging for you?
It's interesting because when I did go back after maternity leaves, the first time I didn't really take too much flexibility. But the second time, after my second child, I ended up working 2 days a week at home each week. And I absolutely loved it. It was the best thing ever. And it was a perfect balance. And it was one of the things that made me really reluctant to leave Mayor Brown. And it was, a very tricky thing to have to weigh up about giving up to then move to take a partnership at Phil Fisher. But I did that, and I went back to working 5 days in the office at Phil Fisher for the following 3.5, 4 years. And then, of course, this hits, and we're now working, completely remotely most of the time, albeit during some of 2020, I was going in once or twice a week sometimes. But it's the other extreme, and it's made me really realize that I had undervalued that time in the office, and I actually like some time in the office, and I liked so much the balance of 2 or 3 days in, or 3 days in, 2 out, or 2 days in and 3 out was perfect in terms of managing family life and career. And 5 days for me working at home drives me up the wall. I can't bear that much of my own company. So the irony of seeing it. all
I think you speak for
extremes.
the masses there, not the few. So yeah, thanks for that. And you've told us that, social mobility is something you're extremely passionate about as well, and something we are on the show at the Legally Speaking podcast. So tell us more about this, and what does Field Fisher do to help social mobility?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I mean, yes, I'm massively passionate about it. I think from the early parts of this chat, you'll probably understand why. I don't come from a naturally privileged background. My parents had to work, my dad had to work really hard to get us into a good position where I didn't come out of university with any debt, but that was through pure hard work. And I've always had that backbone of really wanting to work hard and to get to the next level, or make something better. So I think that I think that most of the issues with the lack of diversity in the profession traditionally has been that sort of issue with social mobility. A lot of people come from very different backgrounds where they're caring for family members, and they don't have that luxury of having the space and the time and the money to go off and study. And so I'm hugely passionate about finding ways for people that don't have the resources to go to university or to take all that time to study, to be able to access the job. And that's why at Field Fisher we've just launched a new apprenticeship scheme where you can come in, from age 18 and train up over the course of 6 or so years, and you can get to the same outcome from there. You don't have to have gone through those traditional steps, but still, we believe in that apprenticeship, and I think it's likely our provider would be University of Law, and we believe in the University of Law to provide excellent quality of education for those apprentices. So it would not surprise me, especially with the apprentice levy, whether we heavily end up going down that route for recruiting. And the traditional model for trainees is changing, it's evolving. We've now got the SQE to train people, which is sort of, for people that don't know, a form of super exam like you have in New York, the New York bar. And it's different, that was to some extent supposed to be designed to bring about a bit more diversity and to take the pressure off of system and firms just only having a limited number of training contracts that they might be able to give out each year, creating an elitism. Now you can do 2 years of any kind of legal training, or paralegaling, and then sit the super exam, the SQE, and qualify. So it's working out different ways to access the profession, and I really hope that over the course of the coming years it changes the access to the profession for people.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely echo that. And it's great that you touched on the SQE there as well. It's certainly not come without lots of debates and discussions around the SQE. But are you sort of, I guess, a fan and one of these, supportive of the SQE? Because I know there has been a lot of debates about it over recent sort of months.
I think whenever you get sort of major changes, you're going to get those kickbacks. And I'm not saying that it won't and hasn't already come without challenges. It has. I endorse the place that it came from. I think it's right. It's yet to be seen, how much cheaper it is to go down that route, which was supposed to be one of the principles, I think. But from an access perspective, which I was touching on just now, I think it can't be right that you have to be endorsed by a small number of law firms in order to become a qualified solicitor, and so I am I suppose a promoter of that access piece, and I hope that we can make it work.
Yeah, no, well said. And you've achieved so much. So just a couple of final questions from me. How do you stay motivated? Because you've gone to equity, you've got a wonderful family, you've kind of reached where you'd probably like to be. Maybe, I'm not sure, but how do you self-motivate, and what tips would you give to others who have probably achieved their goals and want to kind of set for future goals?
It's a really good question, especially with the pandemic. Motivation for some people is obviously and naturally at an all-time low. One of my motivators was most certainly seeing people, and in what I do in real estate finance, there was a natural circuit of events that we used to go to see people, and I'd really look forward to those events and that time with clients and people in the industry. And I think it's been extremely challenging not having had that for just coming up to a year or a little bit more now. And that was definitely a motivator. But I think you're right. You have to refocus. I'm nowhere near, hopefully my potential. Been lucky enough to be let into the equity, but I'm certainly far from at the top of it. So there's always motivators. And I think I'm also realizing that you have to have other things outside of work. I have probably had the downfall of being a little bit unbalanced in the way I operate, and I'm sure that's the case with lots of lawyers and lots of partners. You throw too many eggs into the career basket because you are so dedicated to the job. And during this lockdown and more recently, I've realized there's some other things that I have to focus on, health and fitness. I've seen that in certain clients. They've lost, several stone during lockdown. I've been very much exercise focused and, trying to learn new skills. So I think just trying to find balance is important. And maybe the pandemic in some senses has been a blessing in disguise in that sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you touched on it there in terms of maybe wanting to rise even further, but have you set yourself sort of future goals or plans for your practice that you would like to achieve?
Yeah, there's always different measurements, aren't there? Of it can be billings, or it can be, are you ranked in this directory or that directory? And I think the main thing for me is, if the clients are happy, then I'm happy. If I've got unhappy clients, then I'm usually agonizing over that. So my main thing is to stay client focused and to do the best job I can, and also to ensure that our team are happy, because equally I really can't do the job without the team that we have around us, which you'll know well the importance of happy teams and getting people to stay or to move when they're happy or unhappy. I'm really thankful for the great team that we have at Phil Fisher in the banking side. They're just exceptional. Hopefully nobody will poach them, Rob.
Hopefully not. But there's two points I would just absolutely agree with there. You hit the nail on the head in terms of you have to become completely client-centric, understanding their pains, providing them continuous solutions, really helping them. But more importantly is the second point, because you can't do that without the people. So you have to care about your people. You have to invest in your people and give them time. And so, people who choose to do that will keep and retain and develop staff and do very, very well. Those who don't and choose to neglect and put clients first will lose staff. And it's proven every generation going. So absolutely agree with those two nail on the head points. So Jayne, it's been a real pleasure having you on the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm sure people are going to want to follow or get in touch with you about some of the stuff we said and discussed today. So what's the best way or platform for people to do that? Is it LinkedIn? Or feel free to shout out any web links or relevant social media, which we'll also share with this episode for you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I'm an active user of LinkedIn. I get lots of messages, especially on the graduate recruitment side, and graduate work that I do. So feel free, anyone, to drop me a line on LinkedIn. That's a perfect platform.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much once again, Jayne. It's been really fascinating listening to your journey. It's truly, truly inspiring. So wishing you lots of continued success with your practice and future endeavors. But for now, over and out.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Legally Speaking podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want to help support us, remember to leave us a rating and review on Apple iTunes. You can also support the show and gain exclusive benefits, bonus content, and much more by signing up to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/legally patreon.com/legally speaking podcast. Thanks for listening.